What national service really looked like in 1950s, Britain wasn't quite the character-building adventure your grandad might have you believe. Close your eyes and imagine this. Over 2 million young men yanked from their mothers' aprons at 18, thrust into military life whether they liked it or not. But did you know that 1 in 3 conscripts never even left British shores during their entire service? Yet here's the twist that nobody talks about. The lads who supposedly had it easy staying home often suffered more psychological strain than those shipped to active conflict zones. The boredom, the mindless square bashing, the institutional bullying disguised as discipline. It broke more spirits than any foreign posting ever did. National service, or doing your bit as it was cheerfully called, was Britain's grand social experiment that ran from 1949 to 1963. Every able-bodied male between 17 and 21, later extended to age 26, was expected to give up their youth to Queen and country. Initially 18 months from January 1949, the commitment was extended to 2 years in October 1950 due to the Korean War. No ifs, no buts, no maybes, unless you were a beaven boy down the mines in a reserved occupation, or managed to fail the medical in spectacular fashion. The whole thing kicked off because Britain, despite winning the war, found itself with an empire to police, a Cold War to fight, and not nearly enough volunteers to do either. The government's solution? Conscript everyone and sort it out later. What could possibly go wrong? Here's something your history teacher probably glossed over. The class divide was absolutely brutal. Public school boys often waltzed into officer training at Mons or Sandhurst, while working-class lads got 16 weeks of basic training and a rifle that had probably seen action in previous conflicts. One former conscript from Manchester recalled his sergeant major taking one look at his accent and saying, "Right, you'll be cleaning latrines until you learn to speak proper English." Now, before you click away thinking this is just another boring history lesson, let me tell you about the underground resistance movement that nobody talks about. If you want to hear about the secret societies, the elaborate schemes to fail medicals, and the scandals that rocked the military establishment, then make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what's coming next will blow your mind. The official line was that national service would turn boys into men, teaching them discipline, respect, and valuable life skills. The reality? Most spent their time on mind-numbing tasks, painting coal white, then painting it black again, moving piles of rocks from one end of a parade ground to the other, or guarding installations that sometimes turned out to be decommissioned. Take Derek Thompson from Leeds, who spent 18 months guarding a radar station in Lincolnshire. "I spent more time talking to sheep than humans," he recalls. "The highlight of my week was when a local farmer's dog would wander over for a pat. Whether his particular station was still operational or not, countless conscripts found themselves in similar situations of tedious guard duty. The training itself was designed to break you down and rebuild you in the military image. 6 weeks of square bashing where grown men would spend 8 hours a day marching up and down a parade ground until their feet bled. Then there was weapons training with equipment that had seen better days. Veterans remember being issued Lee Enfield rifles that dated back decades, standard British Army issue that had been in service since before the First World War. The psychological impact was significant. While exact statistics are difficult to verify, mental health issues among national servicemen were a serious concern that the Army rarely acknowledged publicly. The pressure, isolation, and relentless discipline drove many young men to desperate measures. Deaths were often recorded as accidents or misadventure during training, hiding the true toll. It wasn't all character-building camaraderie and jolly japes like the films would have you believe. The British class system didn't disappear when you put on a uniform. If anything, it intensified. Officer selection was supposedly based on merit, but public school boys dominated the officer ranks disproportionately. The regular commissioning board had questions about table etiquette and cultural knowledge that favoured those from privileged backgrounds, not exactly relevant for leading men into battle, but perfect for maintaining social hierarchies. Jimmy Clark from Glasgow tells a typical story. "I had a degree in engineering, but because of my accent, I was made a cook. Meanwhile, this toff who couldn't tell a spanner from a spatula got fast-tracked to the Royal Engineers because he went to the right school. The resentment this created lasted long after demobilisation. Many working-class veterans came home with a burning distrust of the establishment that would fuel the social changes of the 1960s. The officers, for their part, often had no idea what they were doing. Many were barely older than the men they commanded, with no real-world experience. Second Lieutenant Hugh Worthington admitted years later, "I was 19, had never held a job, and suddenly I was in charge of 30 men who'd actually worked for a living. They knew I was useless. I knew I was useless, but we all had to pretend otherwise. It was absolutely farcical." Where you got sent was often arbitrary. Some regiments literally drew names to determine postings. You could end up in Cyprus during the Ioka emergency, in Malaya battling communist insurgents during the emergency, 1948 to 1960, in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, or counting blankets in Catterick. The lucky ones got Germany, decent beer, Fräuleins, and the occasional Soviet scare to keep things interesting. The unlucky ones got Aden, where the temperature hit 50 degrees Celsius and local insurgents made life dangerous. Veterans described it as 2 years of extreme heat and hostile conditions, all for 28 shillings a week, raised to 38 shillings by 1960, when the average weekly wage was over £15. Surprisingly, statistically, one of the most dangerous postings for accidents wasn't a combat zone, but Northern Ireland. Not because of political violence, this was before the Troubles, but because of traffic accidents. Young squaddies, inexperienced with civilian traffic, would get weekend passes to Belfast and find themselves in trouble on unfamiliar roads. The Korean War was where things got properly serious. Between 1950 and 1953, over 100,000 British service personnel served in Korea, with 56,000 seeing combat. It saw 1,078 British soldiers killed and thousands wounded. Forgotten by most today, 19-year-old conscripts who'd never heard of Korea until they were deployed found themselves fighting Chinese forces in temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. Private Ken Roberts from Cardiff remembered, "One day I was working in my dad's shop. 6 months later I was fighting in Korea. Nobody prepared us for that." Now, if you're finding this fascinating, and trust me, we're just scratching the surface here, make sure you've subscribed to the channel. Coming up, I'm going to reveal the stories of corruption, black market dealings, and the regiment that found itself in hot water over missing equipment. You won't want to miss it. Not everyone went quietly into national service. The lengths people went to avoid it were extraordinary. There was a thriving underground trade in guides on how to fail your medical, eating soap to foam at the mouth, staying awake for 72 hours to simulate mental illness, or claiming to be homosexual, which was an automatic disqualification in those less enlightened times. Conscientious objectors had to face tribunals of retired military officers who often viewed pacifism with suspicion. Even if successful, you weren't off the hook. Alternative service meant working down the mines or in hospitals, often under harsh conditions. Many COS said afterwards that military service might have been easier. Medical exemptions were legitimate get-outs. Flat feet, poor eyesight, heart conditions. But the definitions kept changing depending on recruitment needs. 1 month you'd fail for being short-sighted, the next month they'd pass you and issue thick glasses. Students and apprentices could defer their service, leading to complicated calculations about whether to rush or delay education. Daily life for a national serviceman was mind-numbingly routine. Réveillé at 0600, parade at 0700, breakfast that veterans universally remember as awful, congealed eggs and bacon with enough grease to lubricate a tank. Then 8 hours of whatever task your sergeant had dreamed up. Everything seemed designed to keep you busy rather than train you effectively. The food was legendarily bad, often from surplus wartime rations years past their best. One cook confessed years later that they'd been instructed to make food unappetizing to save money. "If they don't eat it, we don't have to buy more," his quartermaster allegedly told him. Accommodation was basic at best. Nissen huts with no insulation, 30 men to a room, one barely functioning stove, and windows that didn't close properly. In winter, ice formed inside the windows. In summer, it was like sleeping in an oven. Privacy was non-existent, yet strange camaraderie developed among conscripts united in their shared misery. They developed elaborate schemes to skive off duties, brew illicit alcohol, and smuggle contraband into camp. The creativity displayed in avoiding work was remarkable. If they'd put half that effort into actual military training, Britain would have had the finest army in the world. Here's something controversial. For all its faults, national service did have some unintended positive consequences. For working-class lads who'd never left their hometowns, it provided education and skills. They learned to drive vehicles, operate radios, basic engineering, and logistics management that would serve them well in civilian life. It forced regional integration. When you're sharing quarters with lads from Glasgow, Liverpool, London, and Yorkshire, you quickly learn that regional stereotypes are mostly nonsense. The shared experience created bonds that crossed traditional boundaries. There was also travel. Yes, you might face danger in Malaya or Korea, but you also saw places most working-class Brits could never afford to visit. Hong Kong, Singapore, Germany, Cyprus, experiences that broadened horizons in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. For some from troubled backgrounds, national service provided structure and discipline they'd never had. "I was heading for prison before I got called up," one veteran admitted. "The army saved me from myself. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it gave me the direction I needed." The mental health impact of national service is only now being properly understood. Post-traumatic stress wasn't recognised then. You were either lacking moral fibre, or you got on with it. Men returned from Korea with what we'd now recognise as severe PTSD and were told to pull themselves together. Even those who never saw combat suffered psychological effects. The dehumanisation, constant petty humiliations, and removal of individual identity all took their toll. Many veterans described feeling their youth was stolen, particularly as they watched peers who'd avoided service advance in careers and relationships. Studies conducted decades later found that many veterans still experienced nightmares about their service 40 years on, not about combat, but about the mundane cruelties of military life. The impact on relationships was massive too. Girlfriends rarely waited 2 years. Marriages rushed before deployment often didn't survive the separation. By the late 1950s, national service was becoming untenable. The Suez Crisis of 1956 had shown Britain's reduced global influence. The military increasingly wanted professional soldiers, not reluctant conscripts. The economy needed workers, not square bashers. The government decided in 1957 that those born on or after 1st October 1939 would not be required to serve. The last conscripts entered service in November 1960, with call-ups formally ending on 31st December 1960. The final national serviceman was demobilised in May 1963, ending 14 years of peacetime conscription. The end came with remarkably little fanfare. Politicians who'd sworn national service was essential for national character suddenly discovered it wasn't necessary after all. The legacy of national service remains complex and divisive. Veterans are split between those who credit it with making them and those who resent the lost years. What's undeniable is that it shaped a generation in profound ways. It exposed insular Britain to the wider world, even while trying to maintain imperial pretensions. It taught practical skills while wasting enormous amounts of potential. It created shared experiences across class divides, while simultaneously reinforcing them. Perhaps most significantly, it created a generation determined their sons wouldn't go through the same thing. The abolition ensured that when politicians periodically suggest bringing back national service to sort out modern youth, they're quickly opposed by actual veterans who remember the reality. The official histories gloss over many aspects: the institutionalised discrimination, the waste, the corruption. Quartermasters sold supplies on the black market. Officers used conscripts as personal servants. Medical officers took bribes for exemptions. In 1957, investigations revealed significant amounts of military equipment had gone missing, though prosecutions were rare. There were the marginalised voices too, Commonwealth citizens forced to serve despite their countries gaining independence, Irish citizens conscripted due to technicalities despite Ireland's neutrality, and the systematic exclusion of black and Asian men from officer positions despite official policies of equality. So, what did national service really look like in 1950s Britain? It was a mess of contradictions, character building and soul destroying, defending freedom while denying it, preparing for wars that never came while fighting ones that were never declared. It was 2 million individual stories of young men navigating a system that viewed them as resources rather than individuals. The last gasp of Imperial Britain trying to maintain global influence with teenage conscripts. A social experiment that revealed British society's deep flaws alongside its resilience. The men who survived it came home changed. Some discovered strengths they never knew they had. Others carried invisible wounds for decades. They built modern Britain with a determination that their children would have choices they never had. Today, national service is remembered through rose-tinted glasses by those who never did it, and with complicated emotions by those who did. It wasn't the character-building adventure of popular memory, nor quite the unmitigated disaster some paint it as. It was simply what Britain did when it didn't know what else to do. If you found this deep dive into the reality of national service fascinating, then please do subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell to catch our next video where we'll be exploring what really happened during the Great Smog of London, including the government cover-up that's only just coming to light. And remember your granddad's stories about his national service days? Well, now you know what he's not telling you. Until next time, keep questioning the official version of history.